Let's start with the conversation that we've been having about migrant discussions, with the Prime Minister saying that actually poor communities can't take the brunt of housing all of the migrants, and that actually more affluent areas will have to do their bit, as he's described it. Edwina, I'm going to start with you, if I may. Do you think it's right that affluent areas and rural areas perhaps should take their fair share of migrants and move them out of the city?
I think you mean not migrants, but asylum seekers, which means that they are in the process of being, processed in order to judge whether they have the opportunity to stay here or not. And the numbers have been going down, and the use of hotels has been going down, because a hotel is a very obvious place to be, and it can cause absolute mayhem. And of course, you get demonstrations outside. So it's something that governments really don't want to do. But yes, using old unused land that they own, former defence establishments, whether it's going to be for asylum seekers or whether it's going to be for, don't tell anybody, new prisons. That's what's going to have to happen. And does it have a deleterious effect on the immediate neighbourhood? It depends who you are, because it does provide work and it does provide opportunities for business. I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to be allowed to say this. You're probably going to shut me up in no time at all. But the obvious thing that 1,200 young men are going to need in the middle of a village like Little Piddington is a brothel. I don't think they're going to provide that. I have a feeling that's not going to be allowed. So, the argument is going to be, who stops this? Who's got a veto? And in the end, we should say, look, nobody's got a veto. If something is going to happen in the public interest, whether it's a prison, whether it's an asylum centre, we're going to have to do it. What we're going to have to do as well at the same time is invest in the whole of the criminal justice system, so we can get people processed a lot faster. So they're not hanging about waiting for a year or 2 or 5 or 10 years in order to get their result. And then if they're not allowed to stay, take them home.
Listen, Edwina, I would never, ever dream of shutting you up. I think we're engaged in fascinating conversation here. I would argue whether 1,200 young men, whether any young men need a brothel. I would never put the word need next to that whatsoever. But Edwina, your point is one that Stig and I have been talking about earlier this morning, that actually, is it more about moving through a system quicker as opposed to having these holding places that are disruptive, I suppose, to any community, anywhere that you put them?
But also, Edwina, are you honestly saying that if 1,200 men, young men, were put in a place at the end of your village for a year, even if it was in the public interest nationally, you cannot tell me that you'd just be like, fine, it's in the national public interest, I don't care?
It's not a question of I don't care. There has to be an element in government of so what. You can only go on consulting people and allowing neighbours to have vetoes for just so long. And our planning law has always said that, individuals do not have vetoes, that in the end it's got to be a question of what's in the public interest. You've got to get a balance and all that. But in the end, what is the purpose? And if we endlessly allow objections to take over, we don't get anything done. Welcome to the United Kingdom in 2026. That's exactly where we're at.
Okay. Listen, Andrew, I'm going to bring you in on this conversation. What do you think? Where's your thoughts about kind of like it and lump it methodology that Edwina's just kind of laid out?
Very, very typical of a politician to say all those things, because we've been lumping it ever since politics began, those of us who aren't politicians. But I'm just thinking of what I would feel like if I lived. I'm very glad I don't, because I get so bored, but if I lived in Piddington, this funny place in Oxfordshire, I'd get bored in any country place. I'm not being rude about the people of Piddington. Supposing we don't have a brothel in Piddington, as Edwina suggests, what are you going to do all the time? And that is the question in these small places. I have a friend who lives in a small village, a bit like Piddington, outside Munich in Germany. And she was there when Mrs. Merkel brought in, never mind asylum seekers, she brought in 1 million people in one go into Germany, and they had to be housed somewhere, and 200 or 300 of them were housed in this little village in Germany. And of course, the young teenage boys and the young men didn't have anything to do in this funny little place. And so crime started to break out. There were luckily in this particular village, relatively minor sexual assaults and that sort of thing. And so, I mean, it is perfectly understandable wherever people settle with nothing to do, that crime and antisocial behaviour will happen.
I think your point about having nothing to do is relevant. I think, obviously, according to the law, that if you are waiting to be processed as an asylum seeker, you can't get a job, you can't work full time. You can volunteer, though. I know that's something that lots of asylum seekers in West London, I know, particularly do. There's a charity there that specifically works with them. So there is, I understand the argument that actually if you are housing people in cities, then perhaps there are opportunities for, you know, whether it's hobbies, whether it's community, whether it's volunteering, there is something to direct the attention and the focus, I suppose. But
well, exactly, because all the social centres that you might think of in a town, a mosque, a church, a pub, a sports club, a gym, none of that exists in Pittington. They don't even have a pub, I believe.
Yeah, there's 400 people. It's a very, very small place. But then I suppose the other...
What are the asylum seekers meant to do? They can't all take up needlework or do the Bayeux tapestry of their journey to England or something of that kind. What are they going to do? They are inevitably going to misbehave, as we would think.
And I guess the question, and Paul makes a point, Edwina, on this, if Andy Burnham is coming into power saying localism matters, devolution matters, then actually his whole philosophy is that local communities should have a say in what happens to themselves.
Precisely, very good point.
So is that not true, Edwina? If we believe in devolution, if we believe in saying we want to make a judgment about our own area, that might mean we're entitled to make a view on whether we have a reservoir, whether we have a prison, whether we have an ex-military base filled with young men who are asylum seekers. Is that not what devolution is actually about?
No, it reminds me of years ago when I was a Birmingham City Councillor and Chair of Housing. We gave devolution to a number of tower blocks, quite nice tower blocks in good nick. And we created little management committees of the people who lived there, and we let them decide who was going to take the empty flats. And it wasn't long before we discovered that they were actually operating a colour bar and not allowing anybody to come in who had an immigrant background. So we had to take the power back. Be careful what you wish for, because you could just find that whatever local power is will simply reinforce the prejudices. I mean, Andrew is quite right about providing services and activities. Presumably, this was also a problem when it was a military base. The sort of complaints that we had against the Americans when they arrived in 1943 and 44. About being oversexed and over here.
And all the American babies that we had, many of them, of course, very good looking.
Yeah. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, of course, if it means that there's a spread of pleasure in the local community. But if you're going to do this, if you're going to house 1,200 young men, then you have to include not just housing and toilets and all the rest of it. You have to include activities and sports and the mosque. You have to coordinate a lot.
And they won't do it. And Edwina, this is never going to happen because the British people don't want to see lavish facilities given to people who are asylum seekers. That's just a fact that we have to accept. There's no money to do it, even if they wanted to. And actually, the system is designed not to ossify these people into place for 3 years. It should be to get them in, and if they justify being here, to keep them and move them on, or to not let them stay in this country at all. It's an asylum system. It's not come here and stay in a military base for 4 years. It is in practice, but it shouldn't be in philosophy.
Absolutely. I suspect a lot of this kind of service should be provided by the charities and the campaigners who are taking a slightly different viewpoint. But it boils down to not investing in the right kind of activities. We haven't invested in the infrastructure to ensure that we can carry out the policies. Andrew calls me a politician. I'm talking about being decision makers. We're spending a lot of money, but it's not going in the right place. It's going on keeping 5 million of our normal people actually in idleness week after week, a month after month, instead of providing the services that we need to run the country properly. And sooner or later, we're going to find out if any government, whatever is the leader, whatever the colour of the government, if they're capable of actually taking some of these decisions.
We're sitting here wondering and kind of passing between us what these people are going to do. But then surely the easier answer is that we actually just change the legislation that we have and allow asylum seekers to work whilst they are being processed through the system.
I would
Yeah, but then
support
they
that.
disappear. Then they would simply disappear into the system. Once they've got a job, once they're out, why would they come back to the camp?
Well, the argument that the Tories would make and Reform would make and other right-leaning people would say actually is you say we come to a number of asylum seekers that we are willing to take. We take them from safe routes, which we have to invent, which we haven't done yet. We do not take any who come over the channel. So the 10, 20, 30, 40,000 people who come over the channel, there is no mechanism whatsoever in existence in Britain to welcome them, irrespective of their need or their background, because we want to cut that route off. But again, that's not going to happen in the next 3 years. It may never happen, in which case you have to find a solution that's temporary, which is where we've sort of started on this.